All right, y'all, welcome to the Scott Horton Show. I'm the director of the Libertarian Institute, editorial director of antiwar.com, and author of Provoked, How Washington Started the New Cold War with Russia and the Catastrophe in Ukraine. Sign up for the podcast feed at scotthorton.org or scotthortonshow.com. I've got more than 6,000 interviews in the archive for you there going back to 2003. And follow me on all the video sites and X at Scott Horton Show. All right, you guys, introducing Wally Rashid. And, we're going to talk about the reason I asked him to come on the show here in a minute. But first, we're going to talk about the news, which is that he is in Tunisia on his way to Gaza with the flotilla. So welcome to the show, Wally. How are you doing?
Doing good. Thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Well, I was just glad to see that you had done this thing reminding people about Jim Traficant and the way that he was persecuted and run out of power. And so I do still want to talk to you about that, and I'm happy to have you on. But then when I got you on, he says, sorry for the noise. I'm on a boat because I'm on my way to the Gaza Strip. So they're trying to do this flotilla thing again to deliver humanitarian aid, and you're part of this, huh? Tell me everything about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm part of the organization. It's the Global Samud Flotilla, and they are on a mission to bring humanitarian aid to Gaza. This is actually the largest flotilla that's attempted to break the siege in Gaza. So we'll have anywhere about 70 or more so boats planned to go. We'll see how that number does. But so far, I've started the leg of the journey from Barcelona to Tunis, and then boats will be departing from Tunis tomorrow, all the way to the Gaza Strip. We'll see if I'll be going all of the way or I'll just be going part of the way. It's mainly a non-Palestinian trip because there's more risks for Palestinians. So I've been doing a lot of the organizational stuff, and I might be continuing up to Cyprus or not, but it's everybody else that's really going all the way there. I'm one of the organizers of the organization, just helping out with the management.
All right, still though. And then
Yeah.
There's so much going on, of course. I think I saw some video, but I couldn't tell you what day this was, that Israel bombed one of these boats with a drone out there in Tunisia, correct? Just, 2 days ago?
Yeah, just a couple days ago, actually twice. We don't know the origin of the drones, but you can only assume. They were drones, and they had some sort of like fire incendiary device, so it looked almost like a flare or flamethrower that they dropped. So it was twice. It was one on one of the main ships called the Family, and then just a couple days ago it was actually on the ship that I'm on called the Alma. So just like a drone in the middle of the night just like flew over and then dropped this device. It kind of looks like a little canister filled with diesel and some sort of mesh or something. It just like lit up the entire top deck. It waited specifically when the captain or one of the crew was actually on the deck to drop it. So seems like it's a lot of psychological operations just to scare people. It didn't actually cause much damage at all to the ship. But they're definitely already started with trying to stop us and influence our mission. So,
well, now, if I remember back, and I don't remember the years anymore. I mean, we covered this at the time, but I'm sorry I lost it on the timeline in my head. But when this was attempted in the past, it was always only just a small handful of boats, where this time the point is to assemble so many boats that it makes it very difficult for the Israelis to stop you coming in, basically, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the most was somewhere in the, what was it, in the 30s or something, but usually it's just like one or two. Usually it's just like one. I mean, back in June when Greta Thunberg, she went, it was just one boat. Prior to that, it's typically just like one. And then they actually came up with the idea to have just, as many as possible after talking to Bisan. She's a journalist in Gaza. She makes a lot of videos. And she was like, no, you have to bring hundreds and hundreds. And this entire effort was just set up within a couple months, honestly. So for a couple months, the amount of work that they've been able to do is pretty incredible. And so the goal is to hopefully break the siege, and that's the intent. And of course, Israel's already made statements they're trying to stop it, but that's not gonna get in the way of our efforts. So we're gonna keep trying.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it does raise the question of, if they're determined to stop the flotilla this time, of what level of effort it'll take, and hopefully not violence. I mean, we saw in the past I'm so sorry I'm forgetting what year this was, but they killed some people, including an American citizen named Furkan Dogan. Was it in
Yeah,
2010?
I believe you're correct. Yeah, I believe it was 10 people died. And that's why now, the entire mission, the amount we do like a few drills every single day on just like nonviolence, really hammering that on. They do like a thorough background check of everybody that's joining the flotilla, and then throughout the entire training and everything, they're really pushing nonviolence and just the nonviolence of the entire mission and the importance of complying. We have the full intent of making it to Gaza, but we have to be prepared for all scenarios, which includes interception. So there's a lot of drills for that to just try to mitigate those risks as much as possible. But as we know, Israel really doesn't care what it does, and it seems to have total impunity. So you can only hope for the best and just pray, I guess, and see what happens.
All right, now tell me, Wally, why would anybody need to float a boat over to Gaza?
Yeah, it's not just, well, one, of course, it's just to break the sea. It's to start a humanitarian sea corridor. I think that's the most important thing. And two, what's happening, this entire effort, it's completely abiding by international law. There's not one aspect of it that's not. It's a humanitarian mission. All the boats are full of aid. It's a nonviolent mission just to break Israel's illegal blockade on the Strip and allow humanitarian aid. Israel's been starving the Gaza population. They're not allowing any aid to come through. They have a complete blockade. They control access to everything that enters in Gaza. So it's one, to bring in aid and to help that starving population. And it's two, it's more so a long-term thing to allow for a continuous humanitarian sea corridor, which is currently not viable. And if Israel decides to try to intercept our fleet simply for bringing humanitarian aid in, I don't understand why Israel would have an issue with rice and antibiotics and medication coming to a starving population. But if they did, it would be another war crime that Israel's committed. So it's about opening up a humanitarian sea corridor. That's the number one aim.
Yeah, all right. Well, so go ahead and talk about what's happening in the Gaza Strip, because I don't know, it's come and gone as a media issue probably for many people. Depending on what you've clicked on in the past, your algorithm might not show it to you at all anymore. So is that still going on?
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's continuing to go on, and it gets worse and worse. Unfortunately, what tends to happen is that when conflicts are drawn on for so long, especially when it goes on for a couple of years, the shock factor tends to go away, regardless of how evil the atrocities are. The shock factor tends to go away, and I think that's what we're starting to see happen. In the beginning, if Israel bombed one hospital, there was total rage, and it was headlines all over the news. And what's starting to happen now is Israel's bombed every hospital in Gaza. So I think just naturally people begin to unfortunately normalize those things. The Gaza population is starving. There's simply just not enough aid going in. It's been leveled to the ground. And, Israeli prime ministers have said over the past couple of years, the intent is to starve the population. We have radical settlers. Their intent is to settle the land, to continue their mission of greater Israel. So they claim that it's a war against Hamas, but every action that they're taking, if you just take an honest, unbiased assessment of the situation and how they're acting, it has very little to do with Hamas and more so their greater aims. And I think that what we're seeing is Israel's using October 7th as an excuse to finally ethnically cleanse the population and push them out of there.
Yeah, it looks like it's working, and then they've launched this massive attack on Gaza City. And, there's reports, there was one from, a week and a half or 2 weeks ago, where the Israeli army was telling Haaretz, yeah, we've completely failed in our mission here. And they were kind of narrowing it down. They weren't talking about the entire campaign, but they were talking about, our recent campaign in, I forget which part of the Strip it was in, forgive me, but they were saying, we had launched this large-scale kind of campaign over 3 months or something and accomplished zero, except getting their own guys killed and, of course, killing innocent people as they went. But as far as quelling the insurgency there, they have not done that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is the thing that people need to understand is that, you know, Hamas, when Israel goes ahead and states that it's in a war against Hamas and it takes out a Hamas fighter, I mean they're taking out guys like, with some guns and flip flops. They're not going up against an equal army. And when you're, I believe recently, what was the data that about 83% of those killed in Gaza were civilians, around 80%. So when you're going on and you're just indiscriminately bombing and killing all of these people, uh, and there's been a blockade on the strip for years now, you're going to naturally have young men. I can't imagine any young men that wouldn't feel some sort of desire to want to resist in some way, when they're seeing their family be slaughtered, when they're seeing when they have really no freedom in any way whatsoever. So for every Hamas fighter you kill, when you go ahead and kill that entire family and you go ahead and maim people, how many new fighters does that end up recruiting? And I think that's where Israel's never going to be really able to get rid of Hamas, because it's an ideology. And unless you change their circumstances, Israel's actions are only enabling that ideology even further, because all these young men know the way they grew up is they grew up without any freedom. They grew up with a nuclear armed nation bombing them to oblivion, murdering them, murdering their families. So they have no other idea who this person is on the other side of this tall concrete barrier, aside from the fact that that person is, and that country is keeping them locked in there. So I don't see how they wouldn't resist, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was what Israel's founders said, in many cases.
Yeah.
Geez, if it was me, I guess I'd join the resistance too. And, the thing is, if you go back, it's funny because Arafat and them were like kind of commie and kind of nationalist. And so you can go, well, those guys are completely illegitimate. They're commies or sort of kind of. And then with Hamas, I mean, they are Islamists. They're not bin Ladenite, world revolutionaries. But if they had their way, it would be an Islamic rule over the place. Yep. And so then, it's like idiocracy. Well, just look at them, Your Honor. And in fact, they have a history of doing terrorist attacks against civilians, including on October the 7th, where, yes, there was the Hannibal Directive and all that, but they did not skip over civilian targets and go straight to the military base. They did attack the rave and the kibbutzes and all of that and kill innocent civilians. And once you do that and you combine that with Islamism, then it just is the perfect cudgel for, all of Western media and, of course, the Israeli and American regimes to just paint all of the Palestinians with that terrorist brush. Yeah, see, that's, they all get to share in that collective guilt for Hamas's identity and behavior. When in fact, of course, as I know the Israeli government has done more than anyone to prop up Hamas in Gaza ever since the late 1980s. So,
yeah, absolutely. That's the thing, and the Western media will never headline the atrocities that Israel commits. My family's in the West Bank. They'll never headline the terrorism that's coming from the extremist settlers in the West Bank. But they have no issue, and they love to highlight whenever Palestinians commit crime in the West Bank or commit murder. However, when you look at the stats published by the United Nations, the settlers in the West Bank commit more violence against Palestinians than the other way around. But the media loves to just present it in one way.
Yeah, your family's on the West Bank now, huh?
Yeah, my extended family. So a lot of my grandparents, uncles, they're actually in a small town in the West Bank next to an extremist settlement called Yitzhar. It's actually the most violent settlement in the entire West Bank. So during Biden's administration, I was actually working with the State Department at the time. Biden released an executive order that sanctioned extremist settlers. So I was working with an organization just targeting sanctions on these settlers. But yeah, so the situation in the West Bank is horrible, just in a much different way than Gaza.
Yeah, well, I wonder, do you worry that that could change and that they're going to just start carpet bombing Ramallah and Jenin and everywhere else and turn the West Bank into the Gaza Strip in that sense and drive everybody off into Jordan or the Sinai or something?
Yeah, I do, and it's clear in all of their actions and all of their rhetoric that that's exactly what they want to do. I think in the West Bank it's a little bit different. I think that I mean I'm sure they've committed some airstrikes in the West Bank, but I think Israel's goal in the West Bank, Gaza is very flat. The whole entire terrain is very flat, so you can actually like forcibly displace them much easier than you would in the West Bank, which is very mountainous. So Israel's approach has been just basically creating South African Bantustans. All Palestinian villages, including my family's village, are in the valleys. Any Palestinian home that used to be on the hilltops was pushed down, and all of the Israeli settlements are on the hilltops. So it makes it very easy for Israel to just create checkpoints at the entrances and exits of the valleys, and it ends up creating this Swiss cheese type state where everybody is in South African Bantustans, and they kind of choke them out to make it insufferable to want to live there. And they'll displace them one village at a time. So you'll have extremist settlers, you know, push one village out and push them into maybe a larger city. So Israel's goal has really been to just create more of a Bantustan model in the West Bank. But I can easily see that eventually becoming something where they just, try to push them to Jordan. The amount of destabilization it would cause in the region would just be astronomical. I can't even imagine. But that's Israel's larger aim. They want to also, settle southern Lebanon, southern Syria, and all of their actions have already shown they're working towards that. So,
yeah. Well, now this is often some crazy stuff, but I'm not sure where the line is anymore anyway. But they have successfully now genetically engineered a pure red heifer. Before it kept having a little flock of white here or there somewhere. They've been trying this for years, but they have actually slaughtered a pure red heifer and distributed its ashes, whatever, according to some ceremony. And so now it's okay to rebuild the temple, according to at least some factions over there, and I believe closely associated with Itamar Ben-Gvir and his group of people who, he ain't the prime minister, but he's close. And of course, they'd have to blow up the Al-Aqsa Mosque to build the temple there. And then who knows what all, animal sacrifices and crazy shit's going to go down then and the Third World War break out. But it seems like that was one of the things that I read about this a long time ago, but it was like they either have to wait around for the Messiah to come or they can do the pure red heifer thing. And then that's like a shortcut. Or at least maybe that was just supposed to happen according to the prophecy, but then they made it happen, through. And it's like this West Texas rancher was the guy who financed it all or something. It's crazy.
Yeah, I didn't actually know that they went ahead and I think the temple. Oh, sorry about that. I think the Temple Mount ceremony stated that they didn't, but I guess what I was also told is that they did it behind the scenes, and they didn't want to outwardly state that they did it because they just didn't want to cause more uproar regarding it. I mean, yeah, this has been their
well,
goal.
I hope I'm wrong about that. I really only read one thing about it, and I've read about it in the past, but I only read one thing about it recently. So if there's nuance there, I appreciate you bringing that up.
No, I think you're right. I heard they stated it was a practice ceremony, but then people were saying no, they actually did it. What I do know is I was actually at Al-Aqsa Mosque back in 2022. I visited my family and I visited Jerusalem, and Israel's been taking a very quiet approach to the mosque. And what they've been doing is they've been actually digging massive tunnels directly underneath the infrastructure of the mosque. And they're stating that they're doing it because they're looking for Jewish artifacts and, old pieces of the Third Temple. And the more that they dig underneath the mosque, I mean directly underneath, you can actually look at photos of these tunnels and these digging. They're weakening the structural integrity of the mosque. And whenever Palestinians apply for repair permits to fix the mosque from underneath, Israel denies it. And there was already, I think, pieces of stone that started crumbling off of the mosque. Palestinians wanted to repair it. Israel stated no. So I think what Israel's trying to do is to actually collapse the mosque from the bottom, and completely just have it collapse on its foundation and then just say, oops, sorry, it's an old building, it collapsed, and use that as an excuse. It seems like that's been Israel's approach, and it's crazy if you see those images. It's just wild how Israel's so deceiving in its in the way it's handling the issue.
Yeah. And, I shouldn't say Third World War thing because I don't like it when people use that hyperbole. And that usually means thermonuclear war with Russia and or China. And that's not an issue here. But you got to wonder whether any of the local regimes could stand if they just sat and did nothing in such circumstances. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
A popular uprising or a coup d'etat is possible everywhere. And then there are a lot of armed forces in the region available to be used. Like when the Houthis took over Yemen. Yemen already had a military. Now it belongs to the Houthis. You know what I mean? So that kind of thing can happen, man.
Yeah, I can't even imagine, honestly, typically before empires fall in history, it's when they're most violent and they're most rabid. And I think that's what we're seeing with Israel is that it's really overextending. It feels like it's very strong. I mean, it's been able to expand. It's occupying more land. But we know that their end game is a greater Israel. They've made that very clear. But they have some serious issues of trying to make that happen. One is you can't bomb your way to peace, which is not even what they want. And two, they have a demographic problem too. I don't know why they want all of this land. They don't even have enough people to fill it. So, yeah, the idea that this mosque collapses, the backlash the backlash that would be created, how the Muslim world would react, I can't even imagine, and it's just it's so difficult to imagine, and the fact that Israel's completely backed by the United States, how would the United States respond to that? It seems catastrophic.
Yeah. Well, I mean, full annexation is clearly on the table for sometime in the next 3 years, whenever they think is the smart time to pull the trigger. Trump called it off in 2020 for election reasons. Wasn't enough. But otherwise, he let him do it.
Yeah. And I wonder, because really the only thing that's allowing Israel to continue doing what it's doing is the United States. If it's every other country, it seems like overall, the vast majority of countries are against what Israel's doing. Even the American citizens, if you look at the polls, are against what Israel's doing. But it's the U.S. government that's allowing this to continue. What we're seeing in the United States, the fracturing towards Israel in the United States, Democrats, vast majority, I believe 76% or so, have a negative perception of Israel. We're seeing a huge divide in the conservative right, especially the younger generation. So I wonder if, typically when a country like Israel begins to act very rabid, it will eventually make a mistake. And we're starting to see Israel make a lot of mistakes. I wonder if Israel is going to be able to get away with its annexation, or if in between its efforts to do so, it makes one very big mistake that leads to the U.S. responding in a way that the U.S. public responding in a way that the government can't ignore. That's what I imagine. That's the only way I can see things changing. But if not, I think you're right. I think then we would see total annexation. It just seems that Israel's actions are very unstable right now.
Hang on just 1 second for me. Hey, you guys. This October, Mikkel Thorup is once again hosting the free Expat Money Online Summit this October 10th through 12th. Thorup is a great dude. How do I know? Well, I toured ancient Mayan ruins with him in Mexico one time. It was rad. He's a serious expert in residency and citizenship laws and customs around the world. He knows it all, chapter and verse, where you can put your money and put yourself anywhere in the world you might want to go. He can show you how to acquire second residencies and other real estate, get foreign citizenship, legally mitigate taxes, set up offshore banking, and more. This year's summit is focused on Latin America. Mikkel and other top-tier experts will help you build your offshore Plan B and understand the geopolitical forces reshaping the region. Head over to expatmoneysummit.com to reserve your free ticket today. That's expatmoneysummit.com. Hey, y'all, I've been working on the audiobook of my new book, Provoked, How Washington Started the New Cold War with Russia and the Catastrophe in Ukraine. I've now finished and posted part 3 of the audiobook to my Substack and Patreon at scotthortonshow.com and patreon.com/scotthortonshow. So that finishes all of George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton. I know there's still a long way to go, but just these first 2 chapters are almost 10 hours of audio to get you started. I promise I'm doing the rest as fast as I can. Get the audiobook of Provoked first. Subscribe at scotthortonshow.com or patreon.com/scotthortonshow. Hey y'all, here's how you can support those who support this show and stay awake while you're doing things. Moondo's Artisan Coffees, moondosartisancoffees.com. Get it? Starbucks supports the war party. Moondo's is with us. And it's really good. Get the Scott Horton Show blend. Just click the link in the right-hand margin at scotthorton.org. Hey guys, I had some wasps in my house, so I shot them to death with my trusty Bug Assault 3.0 model with the improved salt reservoir and bar safety. I don't have a deal with them, but the show does earn a kickback every time you get a Bug Assault or anything else you buy from Amazon.com by way of the link in the right-hand margin on the front page at scotthorton.org. So keep that in mind. And don't worry about the mess. Your wife will clean it up. Well, folks, sad to say, they lied us into war. All of them. World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq War I, Serbia, Afghanistan, Iraq War II, Libya, Syria, Yemen. All of them. But now you can get the ebook, All the War Lies, by me for free. Just sign up for the email list at the bottom of the page at scotthorton.org or go to scotthorton.org/subscribe. Get All the War Lies by me for free. And then you'll never have to believe them again. All right, man, let's talk about Jim Traficant. When I was a boy, I used to love watching, well, first of all, when I was a boy, there was this thing called TV. We used to just sit and watch it. You couldn't really interact with the thing. You just watch it. You could change the channel. We had various numbers of channels depending on your cable package if you had cable. But once they came out with this thing called C-SPAN, I would sit there and I'd watch these politicians because that's kind of interesting. And occasionally they were actually entertaining. And particularly this one guy from Ohio who had this ridiculous bird nest, I think toupee, or if that was his hair, then I don't know what was going on, but it was just kind of funny. Pretty sure it was fake, ridiculous toupee thing going on. And then I never knew what in the hell he was talking about, but he ended everything he said with "Beam me up, Scotty," which is, of course, a reference to the original Star Trek thing and a reference to him being somehow stranded on an alien planet and needing to get the hell out of here. So beam me back up to the starship and get me away from this crazy place. And so I can't remember exactly on the timeline when I started to learn more about his substance and what he was about and the trouble that he was in and all of that. But I was late to that game and then probably too late. And of course, he was a Democrat. So I was just so biased against the Democrats at that time. I couldn't see, we're like, oh no, this guy's friends with Ron Paul or whatever. I didn't know that, you know? So yeah. Anyway, and I've been a Ron Paul guy since way back then. But so, but then I saw your great, and I've known a little bit about this. I've read whatever over the time, but I don't even remember anymore like what I could cite for you about it that I've read about it. So I'm happy to have you on to talk about this YouTube series that you did where was 2 or 3 parts long. It's at youtube.com/@Wally Rashid and Israel Got Him is the series, the Congressman and the Israel Lobby. And so please tell us the story of this guy and well, go ahead and make your whole case.
Yeah, definitely. You know, the way I initially started looking into James Traficant and just really started to admire him is seeing our politics and politicians today and how the vast majority of them are bought out by AIPAC. And it's a new phenomena that we have politicians actually speaking out about AIPAC's influence in U.S. politics. We're seeing the media speak out about it. This is very new, and it still is. It's a huge cost for politicians to talk about AIPAC or be against AIPAC. We've been seeing that with Thomas Massey, Jamal Bowman, but nowadays it's a lot easier to talk about it versus the early 2000s. And I was wondering who was, were there any politicians at the time back in the early 2000s that were even mentioning AIPAC or the influence of Israel And there were really just one or two. Pat Buchanan was one, and James Traficant. And he was speaking out about AIPAC 25 years prior, before anybody else was, like they have today. This was before the age of social media. This was where you're getting all of the information you're being fed is coming from the mainstream media. And he had the courage to really speak out about AIPAC, and he was a very extroverted individual, and he spoke out about a lot of things, a lot of political corruption, and that made him a target very early on in the early 2000s. So that's how initially I started looking into James Traficant. I started watching his videos. There was a very famous interview that he did with on Fox News back in, I believe, was it 2009 or 2014, after he got out of prison, and he mentioned Israel's stranglehold in America. That video started to go viral. So I started to look into him, and I realized that, back in the late 90s and 1999, in the early 2000s, he would routinely mention Israel, and it upset the Israel lobby a lot. And like I said, it made him a target. And he believes, and what he stated, is he eventually ended up getting 10 federal charges related to bribery and racketeering. He's a Democratic congressman from Ohio. And he stated that there was a target on him to just get him out of Congress. The media headlines were always against him. AIPAC was always against him. There was a lot of very powerful forces that wanted to take him down, and he believed that AIPAC put a lot of pressure to put him in prison. So he ended up getting charged with 10 counts, 10 federal charges related to bribery and racketeering. And there was a court case against him saying that he was taking money from companies that he was working with to basically pass legislation for them that would benefit them, and that he was accepting bribes from these companies, and he was just doing illegal things with his employees and charging kickbacks. So the more I started to look into the case, the more I started to realize is that it was really a case based on very little physical evidence, and it was all based on hearsay. So much of it. So that's initially what started my journey, and I started requesting government documents. I reached out to the National Archives, and I requested court documents, which really showed me it just felt like it was a kangaroo court to put him in prison. You mentioned Ron Paul previously and how he had a good relationship with him. Ron Paul was actually one of the very few congressmen to speak out in the congressional hearing regarding James Traficant and say, this guy's only gotten 30 minutes to really defend himself. What's going on here? And it ended up working. He was kicked out of Congress, and he was put in prison, and he was completely shunned, honestly, and the media really went after him. So my series is directly related to that, his statements regarding Israel, and a lot of the issues in the court case that led to his conviction.
Yeah, so actually pick up any of those threads that you want, but make sure you hit them all.
Yeah. Well, so one of the charges was that he sold his boat to an employee of a company that he was working with, and the government said that he was basically it was all for show, and that the reason that he even sold this boat was to accept $10,000 as a bribe in order to push legislation forward for this company. And then I started listening to his podcasts and listening to his interviews. This is after his arrest, where he started to say, I was charged with bribery for accepting $10,000 cash, but the boat that I sold was actually worth $35,000, and he's done a boat survey, and he said that he even submitted the boat survey in court to show that why would I accept $10,000 as a bribe when I could sell this boat anywhere else and receive $35,000 for it? It just didn't make sense. Why would you accept a bribe for $10,000 if you could sell the same boat somewhere else and receive more money? It's not actually a bribe. So he mentioned that he had this boat survey, and none of the jurors at the trial were able to see any of these documents, but it was actually submitted in the courts. So I reached out to the National Archives, and I was able to get a lot of dossier, like a whole thing, a whole sack of documents back. And one of them was the boat survey. And it's directly listed, an evaluation was done on the boat, and the boat evaluation showed that it was between $30,000 to $35,000. That's not including repairs. So it completely disproved that. And the witness testimonies that he had against him, that's what's so sad about this entire case, is that so many of the key witnesses, there were I believe over 80 witnesses total on both sides of the aisle, but it really came down to just maybe 8 or so key witnesses that really ended up sealing the deal. And almost every single one of those witnesses were threatened by the federal government in some way, or they were actually criminals, and the federal government told them they would put them in prison, and they ended up getting shorter sentences, or not being targeted by the federal government if they lied about him. So another one of the charges that they stated, again related to bribery, is that he accepted welding equipment on his farm. James Traficant lived on a farm, and one of the charges was that he accepted this large welder from a company that he was pushing legislation for. And James Traficant said at trial, I'm not accepting this welder as a bribe because this isn't even my welder. I just accepted this welder to give it to somebody else in my district, and I was just the middleman passing it along. And I did pass it along. I don't even have the welder with me. It's not in my garage. It's actually with it's actually with the individual from my district. So the best way to prove that would be to actually, bring the welder to court and to show, or to have that witness come out and say, this is actually my welder. It has nothing to do with James Traficant. This was not a bribe. And this individual was Richard DeTore, and he stated, and this wasn't until actually after the fact, because he was so scared to mention this at trial and to speak out about this, that a group of, I believe it was 3 or 4 men, randomly arrived to Richard DeTore's house, the individual that owned the welder, and they went to his garage and they started putting the welder onto their truck. Richard DeTore comes out and says, like, "What are you doing? This welder is going to Ohio, where the court case is." And these men say, "This welder is not going to Ohio. You better keep your mouth shut." And they started threatening him, and they started asking him questions about his son. They saw his son leave the house at the same time they were grabbing the welder, and he was so terrified about that event that he ended up keeping his mouth shut, and he never ended up bringing the welder to court. And he didn't tell James Traficant about this until afterward. So it was never known who these men were who ended up taking the welder. It was never known whether or not they were working with the federal government, but there was something very shady happening behind the scenes that nobody was able to, that nobody really spoke about until afterward. There was another individual that was at trial, and I believe his name is Ryan Kidwell, and he was supposed to speak out, and the federal government was threatening him, saying, "You have to lie and say that you saw James Traficant accepting money from this company," when he really didn't. And Ryan Kidwell, he refused to lie. He said, "I'm not going to lie." And he would continuously throughout this entire process, receive phone calls from anonymous numbers. And whenever he would answer, no, the line would hang up. But whenever his daughter would answer, his 9-year-old daughter, the person on the other side of the phone would say, "Your daddy's a horrible person. Your daddy's going to die. Somebody's coming to kill your dad." And it just terrified her, and it terrified him as well. And he refused to lie. He seemed like he was an honest man, and the federal government, the prosecutors, threatened him, and they said, "If you don't lie, we're going to have the IRS go after you." And he didn't lie. And the IRS did end up going after him. He did end up getting indicted afterward, which shows that, the IRS or not the IRS, sorry, the prosecutors were threatening these witnesses, and the ones that didn't comply did end up getting indicted. So it seems like it was one of those cases where it was an entire kangaroo court to really just take him down. It's funny that he's, getting placed on charges of bribery and racketeering for accepting $10,000 here, supposedly, which I don't believe is really the case. While if you look at the politics today, $10,000 seems nothing in regards to a bribe. When you see the amount of political corruption that we see in the in our Congress today. So it seems like it was a very intentional targeting. And it's, we have social media nowadays, but if you think back to the early 2000s, the media is a very powerful force. So he really had nobody on his side at the time, and it was very difficult for him to really have anybody, proving it. And when he was speaking at trial, again, like I said, he was only given 30 minutes, and a lot of the documents that he wanted to put forward, a lot of the jurors never even saw any of those documents.
Yeah.
So,
Hey, let me ask you this
it
one.
was a lot of hearsay. Yeah, go ahead.
I seem to remember a faint echo of this from back then during one of those prosecutions, although I don't remember if you had mentioned this in your documentary about it, but wasn't one of the charges that he got some local company to repair his fence? And that was supposed to be like some kind of in-kind contribution or something like that. Do you remember that part of it?
Yeah, I do actually. There was a lot of cases like that where, because he has a large farm and he has a tractor on his farm as well. So there were this was like in a whole entire dossier, honestly, of ways he was accepting ways that he was accepting bribes. And they say that there was a company that repaired his fence, and that was actually a bribe. There was another one where they stated that the prosecutor stated that his employees were working at his farm, fixing his fence. I believe one of the things, just doing basically handiwork at his farm, and they were forced to do it by James Traficant, and James Traficant forced them to do it. And he was accepting kickbacks from these employees, where they would give a portion of their salary back to James Traficant. And a lot of it was based on, hearsay. He had 30 or 40 witnesses on his side in defense of him. But and the witnesses that testified against him, like I said, a lot of them were bribed, including some of these former employees. I also mentioned, APAC was very much so against him. Back in the 80s, he actually had another court case against the Department of Justice in a RICO trial, which he ended up winning. And I believe it was the same prosecutor that was against him in the RICO trial ended up being the prosecutor that was going against him in this latest trial that ended up putting him in prison. So there was a lot of, there was APAC influence. There was just a lot of very influential people that had a desire to see him out of Congress.
All right. Now, so when you go through and read through all the trial stuff and everything, do you have like a steel man kind of argument here where like, well, some of this does look a little shady, or this is really just the case against Saddam or Russiagate or something where like it's just a bunch of crap. It's a lot of it, but it's still nothing.
Yeah, this is the thing, that when you want to find evidence to put somebody in prison, you're going to find it. And there was definitely a lot of it was based on witness testimony. It was just a lot of hearsay. And there was also a lot of bank transactions as well, where they showed, here's specific bank transactions and wire transfers and whatnot. There were specific cases where there was actually transfer of money. For example, the boat transfer was one specific instance where he was actually paid for the boat, and it would show that there was actually a transfer. And they used that to say that he was accepting a bribe. But the case is, when you look at the boat valuation, which he presented, which none of the jurors really even saw, then you'd notice, okay, there's actually a lot more to the story. So I think there were definitely some instances that required you to look further into it. But at the end of the day, I just felt like if it was a very honest trial and the jurors were provided all of the evidence, and people knew that people saw the full story, it would have ended up a lot different. Previously, Ron Paul, we were actually just talking about him as well. He said he just didn't believe it was a fair trial, and he was actually in a congressional hearing, and it's recorded. I actually had it in as a clip in one of my episodes. He stated that he believes that there were people that were being bribed into saying and doing certain things. And then if you look at those things, the witnesses that testified against him, they did end up receiving lighter sentences. They didn't get. Some of them were threatened that they would be looked into by the IRS. They weren't. So I think that there were a lot of things were misconstrued, and the sentencing, I don't believe, was fair. It should have been a lot. I don't believe it was fair whatsoever. at most, just it should have been lighter. If that
Now,
makes it should have
remind
been
me,
lighter.
was it you quote either was it witnesses or jurors who you quote saying, "Hey, wait a minute, this is not right."
Yeah, so one of them was Richard DeTore, and I believe he was one of the he was giving a testimony actually. And the jurors actually, so this is the thing with the jurors, he was in his previous trial back in the 80s against the Department of Justice, and I showed some clips of this as well, is that the jurors at the time he won that case. And the jurors were completely on his side at the time. And later on, in his second case that ended up putting him in prison, a lot of these previous jurors were actually interviewed again, and they said, we just really don't believe this. This whole thing seems like it's the Department of Justice and the IRS trying to go after him again because they were never able even to get him the first time. And we completely stand by James Traficant. It was actually 3 of his previous jurors in the case back in the 1980s. And then now this time comes around, and it was in the early 2000s, and the jurors ended up all going against him. It was really those witness testimonies that were supporting him that were presented in congressional hearing. He had a lot of sworn affidavits that ended up that were in support of him, but the jurors ended up being against him in the second trial, and that ended up really influencing the court decision as well as the federal charges. So I think genuinely, I truly believe that if the jurors had all of the information, and they had the affidavits, they were able to see everything, and he had more time to simply just defend himself, not just 30 minutes, a few hours, and he was actually given the allotted time, and they had all of the things. I think it would have been things would have went in a completely different direction.
Yeah. All right. Now, so talk to me a little bit about the Greta Van Susteren interview. For people who may not be familiar, Greta Van Susteren used to be legal correspondent on CNN back in the O.J. Simpson trial days, and then she moved over to Fox News and got a weird facelift. But she got, I guess, the last big substantive interview with him, or at least big one. So, and sat down with him and talked with him for what, 40 minutes or something, right?
Yeah, I believe it was about there. Actually, no, it was. I think it was actually a 15-minute interview on Fox News, and it was like broken up into parts. And I believe maybe it would have been a little bit longer, but I think like a full 4.5 minutes or 5 minutes was completely just dedicated to Israel, and he really just spilled all the beans, honestly. And it caused him a lot of controversy, and that same interview ended up just coming back into the limelight recently over the past couple of years.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, I see a 10-minute version here. I'm not sure why I thought it was so long. Anyway, so yeah, and he does go off to her and explain that, yeah, it's the Israel lobby is coming after me. And then one might ask, and I don't think she did, but what are you saying, that the Israel lobby can tell the IRS which American congressman to target? Which is, yes, absolutely the implication of what he's saying here, that if this foreign government has an enemy, not just in the American population somewhere, but in the American government, well, they just remove them. It's up to them to decide.
Yeah. No, that interview caused so much controversy. And again, you have to remember, this is when like social media was like non-existent to just really starting to bud. So the media, the headlines had full impunity to just really change public opinion so easily. He was honestly so ahead of his time. And he said, I believe that Israel has a stranglehold on America. They control both members of the House, or the House and the Senate. And it caused so much controversy at the time. But now, it went viral again after October 7th because people watched that and they're like, okay, wait, there's something I actually connect to here. It does seem like Israel has a stranglehold. I think, honestly, one of the things that October 7th showed is exactly that, is Israel's heavy influence on the United States, to where James Traficant said it in that interview, to where America is acting in a way that is not even beneficial to America. American foreign policy in the Middle East doesn't even seem like it's actually to the advantage of America anymore. It's completely one-sided towards Israel, and it doesn't benefit us. And he said this, and of course, he was completely accused of being an anti-Semite. Sean Hannity ended up having him on his show afterward, just completely disparaging him. But now people are starting to realize, okay, what he said was completely like he definitely was onto something very early ahead of his time. Same with Pat Buchanan at the time. He was definitely one of those individuals that was also targeted in the same way. And I think people notice it now. I don't think it's APAC is a lot more in the headlines. People are waking up. So I think if he said what he said then, now it wouldn't be nearly as controversial at all.
Yeah. Well, and there are others who came before him, Paul Finley and other congressmen.
Yep.
So it's a real problem, but it's funny because we clearly do not have the power, but we are definitely winning the narrative. More and more people can see it. As Colonel McGregor says, time wins more arguments than reason. And people can just tell that now it's just gone so far. Their welcome is so worn out. It's unbelievable. So Wally Rashid, everybody. He's in Tunisia on his way to Gaza or helping organize the flotilla to Gaza at least. So good times. Check him out over there at YouTube, youtube.com/@WallyRashid. Thanks for listening to The Scott Horton Show, which can be heard on APS Radio News at scotthorton.org, scotthortonshow.com, and the Libertarian Institute at libertarianinstitute.org.